reason we go stowboating is the smack Mariah that I own, that was built in 1866, was used primarily for stowboating for sprats all through the sort of mid 1800s to the early 1900s. It was the main trade for Brightlingsea, and when I bought the smack 35 years ago and fitted her out and got her going and then eventually rebuilt her, I thought it would be a nice idea to reenact the stowboating, which is what she was originally built for.
Right, here we go. That should just pull down easy, but say when, pull. About there, pull. Yeah, that'll do, yep. Get the mainsail up. You can sail out here without a few bolts around the back. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, yeah.
Must have been a yonky hurried.
Did they used to grade them then? Did they have like meshes to just have the half these?
What, for fresh? No, they just used to look aboard and see what we got. If they were all about this sort of size.
Then they'd say, yeah, well, yeah. We're going to be anchoring in 15 minutes probably, and then it'll take us 20 minutes to get the gear in. We're only just going to do it. But it might be, why not wait for it to slide over and then do it on the... There's no wind, is there? Or in the tidal hole, is there? Do you think that still wind us up? The only slant we might get is to go in the bottom end of the cone rather than the Blackwater, so we've got tide like that rather than like that. Yeah. As soon as that takes a turn, it goes straight off into the swim. Yeah. You'd think that goes straight down.
What's it doing here though?
It doesn't really go down much, it goes across. But I don't know if that still doesn't help us.
That's worse.
It's worse, yeah.
You'd have to come up into the
yeah,
cone,
yeah.
if that's the case.
So it means staying in the river really, I suppose, does it?
Yeah, we'd have to be here somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where there's no fish.
No.
But
well, the edge of the Colne bar where it runs off there, but again, you're still against it, aren't you?
Yeah. We're all right with the wind on the beam, just about.
Yeah.
But the minute it's on a quarter, she'll just keep trying to sail up over the gear. Yeah.
Okay then, I'll speak to you later. Cheers then. Bye.
Stowboating as a method of fishing dropped by the wayside in the advent of steam and power, and trawlers became motorised. Sailing smacks were a thing of the past, and so was the type of fishing. Stowboating is done at anchor, whereas the modern day trawling is all done with great big diesels pushing the the gear along. So we just thought it would be a nice idea to put some scaled down stowboat gear into her and see what it was like, what they were doing 100 years ago. So stowboating is a very old method of fishing which is done at anchor rather than under sail. You anchor the smack in about 30 feet minimum of water. Once the smack's anchored, the two great big long timber bulks that are alongside the smack whilst you're sailing to the fishing ground, once you've anchored, those timber bulks drop down into the water and pulled forward, and the ends of them put in between the anchor chain and the stem of the smack. Got to go underwear? You pull them forward using the hip ropes or the temp lines. The wink chain, which is the chain that connects the two timber bulks up onto the bulk davit. The crane, which extends over the bow of the smack. You pull them forward in between the smack and the anchor chain until they're set across the smack.
What time is the top, Paul?
It's about high water now.
So there's no wind, is there? Might lay on the ebb.
We might have to push into the cone. We might be better off slightly in the cone.
Right, do we need stoppers on this chain so we can get into the boat?
We might even flick them from there, Graham. Right, those all need pulling through, guys.
Hang on. Hang on.
One with the knot in its spot.
And then when you're ready, you drop them down as you're easing anchor chain away, which the hand fleets are attached to. Those are the 4 bits of rope that go from one point on the anchor chain to each corner of the net, each end of the 2 bulks. And you allow enough anchor chain out as you're dropping the gear down so that the end result, you're anchored in the tide with the net dropped down underneath the smack, fully open. The gear that we're using, 23 foot wide and about 25 foot deep, and the smack sits there for a whole tide or for as long as you want to fish, hopefully catching fish.
You ready? Yep.
So the width of the stowboat gear that Mariah would have had, it was measured, the distance from the stem to the mast was half the length of your bulks. So Mariah's gear would have been probably around 28, maybe 30 feet wide. That's the biggest, or the biggest width of gear you could get That's obviously quite hard work, so we put a scaled down set in of about 23 feet, which is much easier to handle, because obviously we're doing this for fun, not commercially. So I think stowboating was really first came into its own. I mean, it was probably used, or versions of it, hundreds of years ago, but certainly here on the east coast, the sort of spratting boom, which Brightlingsea relied on for probably the best part of 100 years, started early part of the 18th century and ran right through until the early 1900s. One of the most important things with stowboating, it is quite limited. The conditions are quite limited as to what will make a stowboating work. Generally, you have to have the wind and the tide together. The trip we did yesterday, there wasn't a lot of wind, and we were forced to fishing on the ebb tide with the wind from on the quarter, which wasn't ideal because the smacks can sail up over the fishing gear. But generally, if you're fishing on the flood, which tends to be, you have more luck on the flood than you do on the ebb. But generally, once the tide has turned and has set in, that's when you anchor the smack and drop the gear down. And as long as you pick the gear back up, doesn't have to be alongside the smack and back aboard, but as long as you've picked the two bulks up from underneath the smack before the tide turns, then you won't wind the gear up. But if the smack swings on her anchor and you've still got the gear and the net down, because the net that we're using is 150 feet long, whereas when they were fishing commercially, probably it would have been about 300 feet and capable of holding about 15 tons. And the last thing that you can afford to do is to wind the gear up by the smack swinging in the tide. Plus, the worst catastrophe is called windmilling the gear, where you manage to lose the bulks and they take a dive with the pressure that the tide has got in the net. The bulks take unless you keep everything tight on deck, the bulks take a dive and twist themselves and then come up out of the water like Excalibur. And obviously the weight in the gear is immense, and potentially you could damage the hull of the boat, maybe even put a bulk up through the planking, which obviously would be disastrous. So it is very, very, you have to be very, very careful that you're setting the gear, working the gear and getting the gear back in conjunction with what the tide's doing. When I bought Mariah 35 years ago, I don't think anyone had gone stowboating, certainly not an East Coast smack, for probably the best part of 40, 50 years. So we put the gear in and found two old boys in Brightlingsea, Dick Harmon and Mac McGregor, who had gone stowboating with Dennis Levitt from Tollsbury when they were in their teens, before he packed up, and that was really the end of stowboating. So I was shown how to do it by two old timers, and what's really nice is some of the crew that we have on the smack who are in their sort of teenage years, they're just as into it as I am, so it's passing that knowledge on to them, and hopefully when I'm dead and gone they'll carry on doing it, so the art of stowboating isn't lost. In the early days of our modern day stowboating, when we were still learning, I went out one day on a beautiful dead calm day out into the mouth of the Blackwater off Bench Head, and there was only me and Peter Allen and his wife. Peter Allen used to own a little smack called the Electron, who would have been too small for stowboating, and we anchored in the tide, on the flood tide, and fished for 2 or 3 hours, and then decided that we'd close the gear up and go home. And we didn't watch points, and we let the wink chain go slack so that the bulks weren't being held up on the top of the water, and they took a dive, and we did actually windmill the gear and put a twist in it. Luckily the bolts kept clear of the smack, but once they take that dive and then twist and come up and break the surface again, you're absolutely powerless to do anything about it. There is tons and tons and tons of weight in the net because it's 150 foot long, and you just have to watch and see where it ends up and what it does, and then try and salvage the situation. But we had to, as best we could, get the gear back alongside and on board, and then take it ashore and untwist it ashore, take it all to bits and untwist it, and then put it back aboard again. Wasn't the best of days.
That's it, keep pulling it forward, guys, and then we'll get it in the round about here somewhere. There's a fish there, don't lose it.
I might be the only one.
So, stowboating in the main was designed to catch sprats. You anchor the smack in front of where you think the sprats are running. One of the big indicators, apparently back in the day, was they'd sail out into the wallet and they'd look to see where the birds were fishing. So if there were lots of seagulls and birds on the water and what have you, they would generally anchor in front of the birds, reckoning on that the shoals of sprats were underneath the birds, because the birds know a thing or two. And that in the main is what they'd catch. Because we're fishing in the rivers rather than going out into the deeps and what have you, we catch a variety of fish. Because the net can be controlled as to how deep it's fishing, you can have the bottom bolt pretty much on the bottom, or you can set the gear so that it's clear of the bottom. So we're catching skate, we catch the odd smooth hound or dogfish, sprats obviously, herring, whiting, bass. It's a whole mix. We've even had prawns in there, quite a few prawns in there that manage to get in and can't get out. So it's quite interesting fishing in the rivers rather than the deeps, because you do get that variety of fish. By my calculations, I reckon we've probably all earned about 75 pence. Yeah.
Unfortunately, lunch was a £5. Proper fishing stories.
Probably the easiest and the best way of cooking sprats is literally just to clean them off in fresh water and dry them, and then dust them in seasoned flour. And because they're an oily fish, they cook themselves in their own oil in a frying pan, but they are incredibly smelly. Whilst they're very, very tasty, they can stink the house out for about 24 hours afterwards. And there's quite a few people in the town, because we catch quite a few, we bag them up and drop them off to people around the town who we think might like them. And there's quite a few of the chaps have come back and said, sorry Paul, but don't drop any more off because the wife won't let me cook them in the kitchen. One of the wonderful things about sailing smacks, especially one like Mariah, where we sail her with no engine, late in the day when the sun's going down and the breeze has eased off, sailing back into the river and back up into Pyfleet Creek to a mooring in the light airs with the sun going down, it's peaceful. All the yachtsmen have gone home, and there's absolutely no sound bar the birds on the saltings and what have you. It's just one of those magical moments, best part of the day really.